What is up, YouTube? It is Docky or Docky Style Gaming, and I am back at it again with another Godfall video for you all today. And in this video, we are going to be reviewing Godfall. Now, this is going to be the first part of a two-part review because I'm going to save the end game for a separate video this Thursday. But I still wanted to get my initial impressions of the main gameplay, the story mode, and essentially just the main game as a whole. I mean, honestly, like I've always said, the end game is the true test of a looter shooter because that's what's going to make people decide if they want to come back and play the game every single day. So the end game review is probably going to be the more important of the two, but I still wanted to get my initial thoughts and opinions out on the game for the most part. So without wasting any more of y'all's time, let's actually just hop straight into this review. And honestly, I think it's best if we just get the bad right out of the way, which is this game's campaign. Godfall's story mode is paper thin. Now, as I mentioned on stream, like most looter shooters, they are all the exact same story and premise. It's essentially the end of the world or a war level event, and you, even though you're playing a co-op based game, are the only one who can save the world, and you must try to stop this big bad from taking over the world. Destiny did it with Gaul and D2, Borderlands 3 did it with Tyrene the Destroyer, Anthem did it with the Monitor, Avengers did it with Mohawk. Long story short, Godfall is doing that exact same thing with macros. Now sadly, of all those games I listed, it is the most paper-thin, cookie-cutter story of them all. And instead of relying on show rather than tell, Godfall decides to tell rather than show. We constantly are hearing about Macros being desperate, he's getting or essentially sending armies of goons out after us, but we never actually get to see any of it. And honestly, the only time we even hear Macros, the game's big bad, the big threat, is the very final boss scene. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me because the way they built him up post-launch, it didn't seem like he had really any motive outside of just become a god. But again, most looter shooters are pretty thin like that, but this one, in my opinion, felt very dry. And what honestly kind of makes it worse is that when we're first introduced to Macros, his dialogue is by far the most 90s, just plain basic evil villain cartoon speech ever.
Orin, this is pointless. We both know how this is going to end.
It's time for your madness to end, brother.
I was never just your brother. I am your god.
You're no one, Macros.
You would dare to raise your weapon against a god?
And it's crazy to me because it seems like the world building of Orin and Macros' past post-launch almost seemed to be lost or, in the context of the game, just gone. And their in conversation is just,
It's over, Macros.
Oh, you're wrong, Orin. I am the future.
You are a monster. You've done nothing but fight and destroy.
This is the world we live in, Orin.
As you wish, brother.
like, what? Did he just bleed out? I thought he just lost an arm. I am the future, but then you die? This is the world we live in? As you wish, bro. You're holding what were they trying to imply? I don't get it. That ending, I didn't get. The story, like I said, was just, if we're being real, the story was just paper thin, cookie cutter. That's the best way to put it. It had no substance, it had nothing. And it's a bit disappointing because it seems like they took a lot of time, especially if you go into the codex and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that they actually tried to build world-wise, but none of that's in the story. So it's a bit disappointing in that respect. Now, luckily, even though that encounter was all built up and just anticlimactic, the boss fight was actually very fun and pretty engaging, which I'll touch on some of the boss fights a little later. But luckily for Godfall's case, and most looters as well, the story isn't the main focus of the game. The story is just there to establish the world. So yeah, that's why most looters' stories are pretty garbage. But like I said again, Godfall's kind of feels the worst of them. Now, surprisingly, that's my only real issue with Godfall. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some things that I'm going to nitpick and kind of want to talk about. Most of it will actually be in my in-game breakdown, but that's honestly my biggest issue with Godfall is its story. It's because I remember when we first saw that cinematic trailer for the fall, it's like, this looks amazing, gorgeous. I can't wait to get more cutscenes like that throughout the game. We didn't get a single one like that. And it was just disappointing because, again, it seemed like there was a lot of story potential that just was wasted. And I mean, maybe they might be saving it for DLC, but I wasn't really feeling the story, sadly. Now, luckily for Godfall's sake, the next part I'm about to get into saved Godfall, and that's the gameplay. Now, gameplay-wise, when it comes to the context of the story, you're traveling through 3 realms to essentially get to the top of the monolith to stop macros. Each realm has multiple open world areas with enemies, Valorplate crafting resources, loot enemies, and activity-based chests, and surprisingly a lot of loot to obtain. Now, if you saw my 10-hour plus stream, you know I had the most fun just exploring, farming, and hunting rather than actually even completing the game. And I mean, 10 plus hours into the story, and I still wasn't completed by the end of my stream because I was just so focused on the open world. Now, also while playing through the story, there are other different types of activities as well, primarily one of them being boss hunts. Now, most of these are actually pretty fun, some borderline Monster Hunter-ish, others are more mechanically driven mini boss fights, which aren't that bad either. But those I will touch on a bit more in my in-game review. Also, throughout the story, you had side quests that gave you a bit more to do and let you explore a bit more of the world both before and after you completed the mission. Now, there's nothing too special about the side missions, just more to do, and honestly, that's not too much of a bad thing. Now, before I get into the next part of the gameplay, there was one thing I did want to mention that I had issues with, not necessarily for the sake of the game, but for the sake of promotion. I mentioned this on stream, but there's a lot of stuff in this game that was never mentioned in promotional material, interviews, and things like that. Now, I'm not saying it would have made a big difference on sales, but it would have been nice for players to see that there's other things for you to do, obtain, unlock, and things like that. Like, they never really showed off any of the open worlds. They showed off the areas, but they didn't show off how big and expansive a lot of these open world sections were. There were some of the merits or kind of like achievements in the game that you can complete to unlock different resources. Personally, I feel like they should have tied other cosmetics to them as well, but there's those that are in the game that they never really touched on either. But there was a lot of just stuff that I started noticing and learning and finding out about while I was playing the game, and I was just like, why did they never talk about this? I'm like, some of this is actually really fun or really good, and I think a lot of people would have liked to have known about this. I mean, customization is another one too that they never really touched on. Now, there wasn't a lot to get into it when it comes with customization, but again, that's a topic a lot of people were curious about, so it would have been nice to at least show something off, whether it be other skins and things like that. So there's a positive and a negative. There's stuff that they should have showed off because it was in the game, and then there's stuff they should have showed off even if it wasn't a lot to show off. Just players would have liked to have known what all was going to be in the game before they purchased the game. Now, on the bright side, there's more good stuff that they didn't mention than bad, but I would have still liked for them to have, promoted the game a bit. It's really like this game didn't get much promotion at all, even leading up to the launch. But back to my main topic, I just kind of wanted to touch on that. I know I mentioned it in my stream, but I still wanted to touch on that in this video. But back to gameplay, I was actually very surprised that Godfall did something right that I generally and traditionally hate in looter shooters. Now, I mention this all the time, but I hate with a passion when games mission gate anything. Just stopping me from progressing with the story because I have to go farm resources or I have to go do these certain activities just so I can do the next part of the mission. I mean, Anthem we saw was the biggest example of that in recent when it comes to looters, where it took you about 3 hours before you could even continue the game because you had to go do stupid crap out in the open world that just completely detached you from the main story before you could even proceed. They did it again later on when you had to go farm the stuff for the shield, but it's the worst. I hate when games do that. It's like, let me play through the game at my own pace. I know games do this when they don't feel like they have enough content. Well, that's not our fault. Don't punish the players by making us do unnecessary medial tasks just because you didn't give us enough content in the game. Now, luckily and surprisingly, Godfall managed to make me like the task because honestly it didn't feel like they were tasks. everything that you did was a new mission or a new boss hunt that just so happened to give you the resources, and of course, enough resources to unlock that next boss fight. So even though technically, yes, the mission was gated, you were still doing brand new activities to unlock that next mission. It wasn't like just go in the open world and just farm a bunch of resources until you have enough to unlock this area. It was, hey, go try out this new boss hunt. Hey, go try out this new side quest. And by doing so, you'd unlock the next boss fight. And though, yes, again, mission gating is something I traditionally don't like, I honestly almost didn't notice it. And though Godfall actually did this for every single boss fight outside of macros, again, I didn't notice it as much. Like, I knew clearly what they were doing, but I didn't mind it because I was still doing new gameplay, new bosses, or new missions. So again, surprisingly, they managed to make me like it. Like, I really don't enjoy that type of gameplay in looter shooters. Again, it's just a way of padding out the story when you don't have enough story as is. Again, I feel like it's more punishing the players because the developers didn't give us a lot of story, but considering that what we were still doing is technically still new content at that time, it wasn't done in technically a bad way. So now that we got the main game and story details out of the way, let's actually hop into the combat mechanics. I know that's something a lot of players are curious about, and I still get that a lot in my Discord and my comment section as well. So let's break that down. So how do I feel about these combat mechanics? Well, I dig them. I'm not gonna lie. I actually really dig this combat mechanics of the game. Now, are these combat mechanics something we've seen before? Of course. You can definitely feel where these combat mechanics were inspired by. A bit of God of War, a bit of Monster Hunter, a bit of Dark Souls. It was just, you could definitely see the influences with it. But luckily, like I suggested, and thankfully turned out to be true, it seems like they took the best aspects of a lot of those mechanics and rolled it into one. And that's honestly what Godfall does well the most. It seems like they rely heavily on their combat to do a lot of their talking. And I'll get a lot more into that when it comes to my in-game review. But for the most part, all of the systems feel fine. The dodge is perfectly fine. Your parries, your deflections, everything like that is great on top of the additional layer when it comes to your skill grid. That's something I recommend a lot of players if you're considering picking up the game. Level up your skill grid abilities, because there's some that actually add unique abilities on top of your basic combat style. Where after you do an attack, you might have now unlocked an ability where if you press an additional button, you do an additional follow-up attack that does even more damage. So surprisingly, it adds a lot more depth to the combat that I think a lot of people are missing. Even some reviewers are missing as well. But the combat system in the game is actually really, really good. And I know some people say it feels clunky, and I've noticed that at times, but part of me feels like it might be the controller if I'm being real. Because though the combat does feel great, I feel like the adaptive triggers aren't registering my pull sometimes. I don't know if I'm pulling a little too light or not hard enough, but it seems like sometimes when I'm trying to activate some of my different techniques, they just won't pull off. So I don't know if that's why they feel a bit clunky, because the DualSense itself just isn't registering some of my abilities in time. But for the most part, I've learned to kind of work through it, and the combat is actually very, very good in my opinion. Now, where the combat mechanics start to fail is when it comes to co-op. Not because they don't work, but in co-op, it kind of seems like mechanics are just thrown out the window because it's just a hack and slash gang up on enemies, which is actually pretty fun, don't get me wrong, but it still kind of sucks that it seems like they put a lot of time and work into the combat mechanics, and then when you're in multiplayer, it's just a hack and slash fest, which again isn't a bad thing. It's still fun in its own right, but it kind of feels like the combat mechanics are just thrown out of the window, and now you're just spamming a bunch of abilities rather than trying to perfectly parry something or dodge something or deflect missiles and things like that. Now on PC, I played the entire game solo. I'm still been playing it solo, and I've had fun doing it. There's a lot more of a challenge to it. The boss fights are interesting and fun, but then when I switched to PS5, I played the whole game co-op. And though it was definitely fun playing with other players, I definitely noticed the difference in difficulty when it came to co-op in Godfall. It felt like we were just ganging up on the boss and just melting him like that. Which if you're just trying to speedrun it, going there with a group of friends and just take out the boss. But for me, I wanted a bit more of that challenge, and like I said, when it came to co-op and Godfall, it really just did come down to spam your abilities and hack and slash away, because he can only hit one of you. So though in co-op the combat doesn't feel as smooth, it's still not terrible. Now when it comes to bugs and issues that the game might have had, personally, I can't speak too much on it, because I didn't have a single problem on PC or PS5. I streamed for 10 hours straight, at over 10 hours on PC, didn't have a single crash, single bug, a single glitch, nothing. And then since I've been playing on PS5, I streamed that as well for about 4 hours, and I've been playing non-stop ever since. I still surprisingly haven't had a single bug or glitch, outside of one actually really cool visual glitch that happened for like 3 seconds and then it stopped, where it mixed two Valorplates together, and I thought it was pretty sick. But other than that, I really have had probably the most smooth experience with the launch on multiple platforms. Now, I can't speak for other people. Now, I know in my Discord, both PC and PS5 players have been having issues with the game. So again, I can't speak too much on it, and your, I guess, mileage may vary depending. But for me, I actually probably had, again, the most smooth launch on multiple platforms than I've ever had in a very long time. So let's get into rating this thing. If I had to rate it and give it a true rating, I'd probably give it a solid 7 out of 10. It's not the best game in the world. It's not the Destiny killer, as a lot of people like to quote or try to say that the next big looter is going to be. It's a good looter, and that's about it. And that's not a bad thing. It has bones for it to be a great looter, and for more content to come, I'm definitely looking forward to it. But for everything I wanted it to be, it does. It hits all of those points, and I'll definitely get into a lot more of that when it comes into the in-game review. But for the most part, I've dug everything about the game. And with the past recent looters that we've been getting as of late, Anthem has been just terrible. We had Avengers that recently came out, and we've seen how that's been going. It's just nice to have a good looter. Again, it doesn't have to be the greatest looter, it doesn't have to be the best looter in the world. I'm just happy right now with a good looter that has good bones to build upon. So I personally can't wait to see what more is going to come with this game, but it's a solid 7 when it comes to talking about the story, the gameplay, and the fight mechanics as a whole. But with that, I'm going to wrap up the video. So let me know what you personally think about the game. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I'm very curious to see how your personal experiences have been with Godfall. Again, I do really like the game, and it has very good bones to stand on, and like I said, it is a good game. And sometimes there needs to be room for good games. A lot of people either put games on the highest of pedestals or the lowest of pedestals, and it's like there's room in the middle. Either a game is the best of the best and people praise it, or the game's the worst of the worst and they trash it. There's never really been room for just good games anymore. And if you are a good game, they generally put you down there with the trash games. And this game is by no means trash. It is a good game, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Hopefully with more updates, they already have been patching relatively fast. Hopefully this game just gets better, but only time will tell. So again, let me know what you personally think about Godfall as of now, if you've played it, or what your thoughts about it if you're planning on picking it up, because I know this week more players are going to be getting their PS5s finally. So let me know if you're going to be picking up Godfall as well, or if you're going to wait to see my in-game review and see what you personally think about the game when all is said and done. So again, that's all I really got for this video. Thank you all for watching. Like always, be sure to leave a like if you liked the video, leave a dislike if you didn't. Links to all my social media accounts are in the video description, along with the link to the Discord. I am out of here, guys. Thanks for the love, thanks for the subs. Peace.